So bear with us. This is one of the first times we're doing this, but it will improve, and really excited to talk Ohio State football today. So I guess I don't know if you had a chance to see it, but the availability report did just come out. We're not looking at too many surprises here, maybe just Cameron Brown, but Jackson Smith and Jigba out again. The rest of the list, a lot of people that you're probably not surprised to see, a lot of long-term injuries. But anything pop out with the injury list as it came out just recently?
No, I just think it confirms, as we've talked about, throughout the season, and we've been trying to kind of keep the Buckeye fans in the loop on this stuff. That nothing is of severe nature right now, and anything you hear about the Jackson Smith and Jigba stuff, they're just being extra careful. He's dealing with a hamstring strain, not a tear. This isn't a surgical type of situation. This isn't a career-ending type of thing, or a season-ending type of thing, or a Nick Bosa kind of type of thing. They're just being extra careful. Actually, from a health standpoint, right now, Ohio State, after 4 weeks in the season, is about as good as you could possibly hope for, knock on wood. And, trying to finish the first half of the season strong and then kind of get into the second half where we get more into the meat of the schedule. But from an injury standpoint, we're doing really well, and that's a tribute to the players and to Coach Mick. And they're all pretty excited about where we stand athletically right now.
Perfect. So kind of turning away from Ohio State, a lot of activity with some of the early games. I had hopes that Iowa might be able to push Michigan a little bit, but I guess it's not entirely surprising that they laid a goose egg in the first half and are down 13-0 at this point. Any thoughts on that game?
Yeah, it's I was not very good. Clearly, at least offensively, they really struggle. And Michigan, Michigan's good enough to beat up on these bad teams, and that's just going to make it even that much more better because the hype's going to be off the chart by the time that they come rolling into Columbus. And I'm just telling you, they do not have the speed on either side of the ball to play with the Buckeyes. I've been saying this for a while. I'm telling anybody, if you can get a futures bet down in Ohio State against Michigan, do it, because this Michigan's team is fool's gold, and they're going to get exposed in late November in Columbus.
Yeah, it seems like historically with Harbaugh, whenever they are playing someone where they have the talent advantage, they can sort of bully ball their way into victories. And outside of last year, generally when the talent level was a little bit more even, and they had to get creative with their offense. He obviously Jim has had a pretty bad track record against some of the better teams, and last year really was the first time where kind of that bully ball mentality actually worked against Ohio State. So I guess up until this year, I've been overly confident every year. So I will take your word for it, but I'm still, I guess, a little bit scarred by last year's game. So a little bit less confident, despite what's been a pretty easy schedule for Michigan so far. And this is pretty surprising, but TCU is absolutely blowing out Oklahoma right now. 41-17 in the second quarter. Are the wheels falling off for Brett Venables, or what's going on there?
Yeah, well, the bank, if you looked at, you're following the bank's picks, the bank had picked TCU plus 6 points today as one of his 5-star selections. And that's obviously, you never want to call a bet too early, but that was looking awfully good. Yeah, I think Oklahoma's in a lot of trouble. And, I think it's a situation where you've got teams in that conference in general are in trouble, and it's really hard to look at those anybody in that conference and say, boy, who's on the ascent, who's coming up, who's taking it to the next level, because they're all just kind of mediocre or mediocre to bad. And Oklahoma, I had concerns about them coming in the season. I thought that people were overranking them, and certainly overrating what they had based upon that roster. And today's Exhibit A, TCU looks like they could score 100 on them and not even break a sweat.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting when Texas and Oklahoma jump to the SEC soon. They're in for a few rough seasons. It does seem like Texas might be. Despite early loss, they might be heading in the right direction. Quinn Ewers in his limited time looked really good, but that's going to be a rough awakening for them when they get into that conference. So All right, and then kind of moving along, we see that honestly, this is another one that's a little bit surprising. After their recent performance, I thought Minnesota was just going to roll over Purdue, but that has not been the case as they're in the battle going into the second half. Any thoughts on that game?
Yeah, I'm a big Minnesota guy. I like Minnesota. I'm a little surprised by this, even though I believe last time I checked, Minnesota had the lead. I'm not sure if that's still correct, but I think Minnesota is going to be one of those teams that's going to be able to jump up there and play teams tough and beat some good teams. If you're ever looking for that team that's got that ability to kind of upset somebody on the road if they're overlooking them, it's Minnesota. They've got all the elements there for sure. Now Illinois just scored. They're putting it on Wisconsin, so our Wisconsin wins not. All of our wins are getting less and less impressive as Notre Dame kind of circles the drain, and Wisconsin's getting beaten by Illinois 20-10. But from Ohio State standpoint, we can just we can only play the teams that are lined up against us, and I like the way that we're improving. But the rest of this Big Ten is just kind of a mess, and every week it's another surprise and not generally a positive one.
Yeah, it's certainly looking like the big three in the East, and even Penn State. They obviously completely destroyed Auburn, but I don't think Auburn's a particularly good team this year. So yeah, it's looking like a few strong teams, and then the rest, which not too impressive, but maybe Minnesota will turn it on here a little bit going into the end of the game. So okay, well, turning back to Ohio State, and we can obviously jump in with these games. First of all, please ask questions. We want to make this interactive. We'll make sure to get through them, but let's look at. There's a few interesting things I saw with the Ohio State, the line, and some of the prop bets, and I wanted to get your thoughts on some of those. So these are numbers as of 11:30 Eastern. So I guess we'll start with a big one, which was minus 39. Now, one interesting fact is that since Rutgers has joined the Big Ten, apparently they have never led in any game against Ohio State, which is a pretty astounding fact. So hopefully we get off to an early start and we keep that streak going. But Ohio State minus 39. I do expect, obviously, we're going to get a lot of young guys in here if it's a blowout, so might give up a few scores. But thoughts on that as an opening line?
Yeah, I think the odds makers did a pretty good job because, whenever you set these lines, from a betting standpoint, what you try to do is you try to kind of go through your betting scenarios and kind of pick your betting scenarios and how the game's going to play out. And every time I do my betting scenarios, I come up with, somewhere between 35 and 42 points. And yeah, I think my final prediction that I had was somewhere around like with Ohio State winning by 39, and I I think the odds makers have got this one pretty good. This is a no bet for me. It's just because I think Ryan Day's gotten a lot of criticism lately, and rightfully so, for the fact that he's kept the starters in too long. And obviously they're trying to get Stroud some numbers, try to get Stroud the Heisman, but they've been leaving that on both sides of the ball. Guys in for an awful long time, and I think there's been some rumblings with the program that some guys were unhappy about that. It doesn't really go for esprit de corps and the excitement of the guys on the twos and threes and fours when the ones are gobbling up all the reps. So I think you may see a little bit more liberal substitution pattern. But that does lead me to one prop bet. I know you're dealing with large numbers, but I want to circle in on one prop bet, which is C.J. Stroud. The over under on touchdown passes today is 3.5, and for me, that's a play on to the over. I play over 3.5 because I don't think C.J. comes out of the game until he throws that fourth touchdown pass. I just don't think that can happen, so if I was betting, looking for a prop bet to play, I'd play C.J. Stroud over 3.5 touchdown passes.
Yeah, that was actually the first one I was gonna ask you about, and also for the over under CJ, we have over under passing yards at 333. Is that one you think you take the over as well?
I think you have to. I think you have to take the over on that. I don't like that one as much as I like the 3.5 touchdown passes, but I definitely would. Again, it's all about when's he going to come out. When's he going to come out of the game? Do they hit some big, 60, 70, 80, 90 yard passes early to kind of gobble up the yards? But I just don't see him playing very much, past the end of the first half. So the question is really how much can he plow up in the first half, and can they get him in and out of there and still get the big numbers going on? So it's going to be that one's going to be close.
Yeah, the one thing I'd really like to see, it seems like whenever though they do get, Kyle McCord or the backups in, the problem is we're usually so far ahead that it just turns into, these guys just turn around and hand the ball off conservatively. So we don't really get a chance to see if they can air it out. And if they were, if they're getting Stroud out a little bit earlier, we might get to see what someone like McCord looks like in what would be plays that like Ryan Day would actually be calling when he's trying to win the game, rather than let's see him hand the ball off to Dallin Hayden 3 times and potentially punt, right? So that's that's certainly a hope of mine. So kind of moving along, we have Marvin Harrison Jr. over under for receiving yards at 89.5. Would you take the over under on that one?
I'd probably go under on that one, just because if we're talking about 300 and something passing yards, and given the fact that the running backs, I feel like the running backs could be a big chunk of the yardage this week. Um, I also, kind of going back to kind of an overriding theme. You have to remember the opponent. The opponent's Greg Schiano. Schiano does have Ohio State connections. He coached here. They're, Days and Schiano are pretty fond of each other. So I don't think Day's going to want to embarrass him. And that's always a big thing you look for. You look for. So when Ryan Day plays Maryland, you always look for him to run it up because he doesn't like those guys. But I don't
Yeah.
think he'll do. I don't think he'll do that to Schiano. I think he'll let Schiano, surrender with dignity. So I'd play under on any of the receiving player props.
What was it? I mean, I think it was like a few years ago though that. Well, that's true. It's Shiano pulls out all the trick plays and everything he can to try to keep it close, right?
Oh
So
no, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, no, he'll definitely be doing that. Yeah, that's we should have an over under on the number of Schiano trick plays, whether it be onside kicks or fake punts or whatever it might be. Because yeah, he'll pull out everything in the arsenal because he's got nothing to lose, and yeah, those plays are fun for his players to try to execute, and I'm sure Ohio State's well aware of that.
it's interesting with Rutgers because that New Jersey area is actually a pretty rich recruiting region, but the problem is like it seems like Ohio State's going and grabbing whether it's like Luke Whippler, we're going out and grabbing the best guys from Jersey, and actually Michigan recruits Jersey pretty well also. So I don't know if they've really gotten the Big Ten lift that we had all expected. I think Shiano is probably a better coach than what they've had previously. Well, probably back when he was coach last time. It was the last time they had a nice little surge. But I expected a little bit of lift for them. Their defense is solid, but I mean, this is an offense at Rutgers that has really struggled. So it's going to be fun today to see what Jim Knowles can do.
Yeah, Knowles is gonna. We've talked about this all week in the Nuggets. So Buckeye Scoop family members should have a pretty good idea. I mean, the reality is the Knowles defense up until now has been implemented to about 20%, and that's a fact. It's about 20%, and so they're going to start bringing out more of it, and it'll be fun to kind of see the different wrinkles that they start running. Most of them involving blitz and pressure packages, but up until now, you've seen a relatively vanilla Jim Knowles defense, and I think they're getting stuff ready for the second half of the season, getting ready stuff ready for the meat of the season. But we haven't scratched the surface in terms of Jim Knowles and what he wants to bring to Ohio State from a defensive standpoint.
That's right. So switching back to some of these prop bets, we have Trevion Henderson over under 87.5 yards.
Yeah, you know, I, whew, it's a, we're talking about a number of different things right now. Those lines are pretty tough right now because
Yeah.
you've got Stroud that they're going to want to get Stroud his numbers and his touchdowns. So how many yards really does that leave for Trevion on the ground? And then you've always got the Mayan and Dallin effect on that in terms of getting them out. Um, but with Trevion, he could break that in one big run. I'd probably tend to bet the under on that one as well.
Yeah, so that kind of ties to the last prop, which is the longest touchdown over under 54 and a half yards. It has been strange this year because Trevion hasn't really popped that big one. It felt like early on last year, he was off to the races on some big runs. So do you think today's the day he potentially pops one? And if so, I guess what are your thoughts over under 54 and a half yards for the longest touchdown?
I'd probably go under. Teams are playing that too high shell against us. That's really kind of the standard defensive positioning. And Shiano's a terrific defensive coach. Even when he's undermanned with players. And the book on how to slow down Ohio State to have any chance to even stay in the game, not get embarrassed, is to keep those two safeties back, keep things underneath, which again slows down your it keeps you from getting those big long runs, but it opens up the door for those 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 yard runs, that kind of those chain movers. So I probably go under on that as well. I don't think teams are really allowing us to play pitch and catch over the head. Um, and again, I say that, and sure enough, probably first play of the game will be an 80-yard touchdown. And we'll be like,
Yeah.
I guess that one went right out the window. But no, I think teams, they know that if you play that defense against Ohio State, that you're done, because Ohio State's got guys that can run and a quarterback that can throw it, and an offensive line that can protect. So it's really, almost a mutually assured destruction if you play anything short of the shell against them. So I would expect them to keep that in, and I would keep that. If I'm betting, I'm betting under 54 and a half yards touchdown play.
Awesome. Well, we got a few questions in the chat. Again, I encourage you guys to submit your questions. We'll try to get to all of them. So the first one, I know I don't know what you can share about this because I know you don't like to talk injuries, but there's a question about JSN hurting his other hamstring. Is that just a rumor? And I'm not sure if you can touch on it, but it's something I hadn't heard. I would assume they're just kind of resting the same hamstring. But any comments on that, or not when you want to?
Yeah, we don't like to get into specifics on that stuff, but what I can tell you is Jackson is a lot closer to playing than people know. Jackson could have played if these games were vital. If these were playoff games, you would expect him to go out there and be playing. So anything that you're hearing about severity, about multiple injuries, or about anything is just being overblown right now. Nobody in the Woody Hayes right now is lining up and let when you see him and you see him running around, jumping around, you realize that he's really not limited. He's just they're being ultra careful with a hamstring strain that they just don't want to turn into something bigger. So I think he's going to be just fine.
Perfect. Yeah, I think kind of what we had already talked about with the Big Ten being down. It doesn't really make sense to kind of push him on some of these games, even if there's just a minor question around the injury. But we got to have him ready for Penn State, and we got to have him ready for Michigan. So, with the bye week coming up, I think it makes sense. Let him rest as long as possible. So another question, want to know, do you think we'll see Caden Curry at the Jack today, and will Sawyer go back at defensive end?
Well, I think we'll see more of Caden Curry. Now, whether it's at the Jack or not, I'm not sure, but I think we'll see more of Caden Curry. They like Jack Sawyer at that Jack position. They feel like that's given them a lot of flexibility. They're enjoying dropping him back into coverage sometimes and kind of playing some of those games that they do with those stand-up defensive ends. And I think he's been playing at a really, really high level, and I think you're going to see more and more of that as it's coming on. The guys that I'd be looking for, I'm just looking for more time out of the young guys. Now, that may or may not happen this week, but Larry Johnson's made a really public comment about it's going to shorten the bench and the rotations are going to get a little tighter. And I think that's really code for you're going to see more of those, the Michael Hall, Tyleek Williams types of combinations up there on the inside, and more of JT Tumalone and Jack Sawyer on the outside. And I think that's frankly the right formula for this defense, because those guys are just so talented. and so disruptive and are playing so well within this scheme. And um, I think, but watching the rotations in the defensive line will always be kind of a pretty good indicator of what Knowles thinks about guys, because as we've learned early on, Knowles doesn't play around. He didn't hesitate to pull Proctor early. He didn't hesitate to pull Denzel. And you look at, we'll leave Denzel out of it for a little bit just because the injury, but Proctor's played like a man possessed since he's been back. I mean, he's been really good, and I'm not sure if people realize how good he's been, but he's been really good, playing at an extremely high level, and I'm looking for that to continue today.
Yeah, I mean we have four elite safeties at this point, I would say. So, um, it's hard not to get ahead of yourself with some of this, but I think if the team, and we talked a little bit about this before, but if the team can get someone like Tommy Eichenberg back for next season, uh, that defense is going to be scary next year because you're going to have that whole sophomore class and the D line returning. They'll probably have to give away fewer opportunities to get after the quarterback to some of those seniors. So it's pretty exciting to think about what we could have next year on that defense. Of course, the big question mark is always quarterback, which you can't underestimate the potential that could have. But if Jim Knowles back year two, that could be one heck of a defense coming back for Ohio State.
Yeah, I've said many, 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 many times that coaching matters at the collegiate level and almost determines your success or failure. So the fact that you have Knowles back, and equally importantly, all the guys that he brought with him, back to fully implement that Knowles system, the guys will just be that much more familiar with it. And we won't be implementing the system; we'll be more fine tuning it. Obviously keeping guys like Tommy would be key because how do you replace a guy like that? But you know, I just think about what Tommy was last year, and nobody would have cried a tear, frankly, about losing Tommy Eichenberg last year. And Jim Knowles has taken that in one season and turned him into a potential All-American linebacker. And I think that if you just said that, Phil, a year ago, people would have
So
laughed you
crazy, yeah.
right out of it. They're like, you're nuts. But I mean, I think he's legitimately, I mean, if there was a mid-season All-American team, there's a very good chance that Tommy Eichenberg is your first team middle linebacker, and that's how much he's improved. That's a tribute to all his hard work and what Jim Knowles has done. So I don't have any doubt that even if we lost him, that he'd find the next. And remember, you've got Cody Simon and some other guys too that would be back. But Tommy's old school. I fully expect to see him back for one more year. Him leaving would be a little bit of a surprise to me because this kid just loves to play football. Was born to be a Buckeye, born to be a college football player, and I fully expect to see him back next season.
Yeah, and I'm hoping today we might have a CJ Hicks sighting. It seems like Jim Knowles is a little bit slower among positional coaches with the linebackers to make those rotations. So yeah, you never know. I mean, you're completely right. We wouldn't have expected this with Tommy, but who knows? Like we could have CJ Hicks sitting there ready to go for next year. Could step up in a big way. I mean, Chip has got a few plays, mostly on special teams. So I'm not sure who's sitting behind them, but. Sticking with Jim Knowles, a few questions from the chat. Do you have any concerns with his recruiting? He's certainly doing a good job on the field, but obviously we've had a few. Tackett Curtis comes to mind, big misses on the recruiting trail. Any long-term concerns there, or is this something that might just be a blip in the beginning of his tenure at Ohio State?
Yeah, I don't think Jim Knowles is a great recruiter. I just don't. There's nothing in his resume that would indicate that he's a great recruiter. And I think, from my standpoint, I've just come to the peace of that. It's almost like Kevin Wilson. I look at Kevin Wilson. Kevin Wilson is an unbelievable addition to our staff and a great thing, but he's not a particularly dynamic recruiter. Not somebody that generally leads guys when we're trying to go out and get them. I think you're going to have to augment Knowles's recruiting abilities with other people on the staff, and Ohio State's certainly capable of doing that. And I think it's kind of baked into the cake. So does his lack of success surprise me? No, because I've never looked at him as being an elite recruiter when he came here. But I think his ability to generate the X's and O's and the schemes and the in-game adjustments, far than than more than make up for any of his recruiting deficiencies.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's been a few nuggets on sort of Larry Johnson's state of mind over the last year or so, especially with the integration of Jim Knowles into Ohio State. But obviously, the retirement rumors have been swirling for a while there, but it really doesn't feel like he's had much of a drop off in recruiting. In fact, for some, it might be a little bit of a riskier approach, but it seems like we got a few big names that he's going after. He hasn't really gone after a bunch of Plan B guys. He's sort of waiting till the end of the cycle to try to bring in his big recruits. So it's certainly it's been nice to have guys like that on the staff who could, like you said, fit in really well with what Jim Knowles is doing, especially from a scheme and strategy standpoint.
Yeah, well, Larry was not happy the last few years, and I think that really kind of fanned some of the retirement talks, and I think that's what people have to understand is the the defensive room was a mess. It was a complete mess. It was, just yeah. The players had quit on the staff. There was open revolts between the position groups. You had guys in there that didn't know what they were doing, and it was a problem. And I think Larry now has been reinvigorated by having this structure and having this system and having a guy like Jim Knowles, who is the absolute unquestioned leader of the defense, who the players all 100% buy into and 100% respect. And I think that's made if that could add to Larry's tenure here at Ohio State, I would bet that adds another 5 years to Larry's tenure here at Ohio State because he seems like a man reborn right now.
Yeah, it's certainly noticeable on the field. I mean, last few years were very frustrating as a fan, and even going back to when we played Alabama in the title game. I don't think with like a Jim Knowles we would have beat Alabama the year, but it might have been close. So this it's frustrating because it feels like a lot of wasted opportunities over the last few years. Just if we'd even gotten slightly above average defense, which should be easily achievable given the way that Ohio State recruits. So hopefully it's just up from here. So another question, please continue to submit your questions and thoughts. What has been the biggest surprise from Ryan Day this year?
The biggest surprise from Ryan Day, well, I just what I've been really pleased with. I mean, I think the negative surprise is something we've already talked about earlier, which has been his propensity for keeping the starters in there longer than I'd like them to be. That's a little unusual. It's something I'm not particularly crazy about, and something that I'd like to see them modify and change in the future. On the positive side, there's many positive surprises, but I think his evolution as a play caller and his integration of the tight end into the offense and the tight end concepts that they're starting to introduce. That to me, that's been the biggest surprise. That's something that I haven't seen at Ohio State. I for the older people that can listen, I liken it to when Walt Harris came to Ohio State and kind of introduced the swing pass to the running backs into the arsenal. The impact that Ryan Day's been able to you feel from guys like Justin Fry and from Kevin Wilson about getting the tight end fully acclimated and watching them actually run plays and design sets, week after week after week for the tight end. That's been the biggest surprise to me, and I think it takes an Ohio State offense that was already great. It was already elite, number one, number two, number three in the country in every category, but it just makes them that much more diverse and that much more dangerous, and that's certainly been a pleasant surprise.
Certainly. All right, let's do a quick check-in college football scoreboard. So we have looking at the top 25 games. Michigan 20-0 over Iowa, still shutting them out. We have Ole Miss up 22-19 on Kentucky. That's a good game. TCU 41-17, absolutely blowing out Oklahoma. Minnesota's tied things up against Purdue. It's 10-10, and Kansas State 20-20 against Texas Tech. Early on, right now with the Utah and Oregon State game, already tied up 7-7. So, it's not looking like Iowa's going to put many points up on the board, but I think 20 might be insurmountable for them in
that
one quarter.
out of reach. Now this Minnesota Purdue game, Minnesota's starting to kind of exert a little bit of control. I've been noticing the last couple of weeks Minnesota's starting to run this. I'm trying to think of who else was running this. They're running these plays where it's the zone read in the backfield with the quarterback, but he's not doing the usual just hold it and then pull it out. Like he's holding it in there a long, long time, and it's almost causing the defensive lineman to almost stand at the line and kind of trying to wait to read whether it's pass or run. I think that's kind of an evolution of this zone read RPO game that's going on right now. But Minnesota's starting to run it, and it's interesting because you see the quarterback in there with his he's got his hands there in the belly of that running back, and it seems like it's forever. It's like 2-3 seconds where he's sitting there holding it, waiting at the mesh point, trying to decide what he's going to do with it. And it's really causing problems for the defense.
Yes, it's. I guess sort of along that topic. What are the chances we see C.J. Stroud run for more than 5 yards today with the ball in his hands?
Yeah, I'd like to see it. I'd like to see it every week. I'd like to see it just be part of the program. I think it's something that they want him to do. I think it's something that the NFL coaches want him to do, but probably going to have to be on a broken play. And I think it could happen because Rutgers is not going to be shy about bringing the blitz, and if he can just step in, dance around the pocket a little bit, break a little bit of contain. They're playing that man defense. Everybody's running their back to him. I can see him scatter for 10, 15 yards on a scramble and jump out of bounds. That definitely would not shock me.
That would be, at least like put it on film, right, for the big games. That's all we're asking. He can run 4 yards and just slide. He's not going to get it.
Absolutely.
So, perfect. Another question from the chat. So, how much fun has it been to watch Cade Stover this year? I agree. The kid is easy to root for, playing at a high level. He's definitely one of my favorites on the team. It sounds like that is a shared sentiment among Buckeye fans.
Yeah, it's yeah. I don't want to prop my own stuff and saying Case Over is going to be good is kind of a lame. But I'd written a nugget back in like June of 2021, and I went back and looked at some of the comments on Cade. Actually, with a nugget, it was covering like Cade, Mayan Williams, and a couple of guys, and Jackson Smith and Jigba, and I was like, wow, man, this was pretty good. But Cade's an easy kid to root for. Seemingly had come out of nowhere, but now he's kind of a household name in Ohio State, and it's it's just been one of the great stories because you really felt like when you saw him get bounced from position to position to position, those stories just generally do not end up well, like ever, and for him to have gone from that back and forth and back and forth. I mean, he did it multiple times, and now he's at tight end. I don't think they would dream of pulling him out of the tight end position. It's just fun. It couldn't happen to a better kid. Couldn't happen to a tougher kid. A kid that if you want your captains to reflect what you want for your football team, and you're looking for toughness and old school football and high football IQ. I mean, he checks every one of those boxes. So as much as I've complained about Ryan Day about selecting some captains that don't play, to have Cade's a guy that plays at a really high level and certainly sets the tone for the rest of the Buckeyes.
Yeah, one of the fun things to do. So Kirk's done, some of that film review. To just follow Cade on some of these plays. I mean, he's had some of these where he goes in motion and then he's blocking the guy and he's they're flying towards the sidelines. He really just goes to the whistle. He's a tough guy. So good to have, and especially after last year where the toughness really came into question, he's the perfect kind of leader for this team. Someone who's not going to let up.
Well, you brought up an interesting point. And this is something that the fans, we really try to give you guys a little something extra to think about and to watch a little bit. Notice how often they bring Cade in motion. Okay, they bring him in motion a ton, more so than any time I've ever seen with the Ohio State tight ends. And why they're doing that, they're obviously trying to move him around to get him into pass routes, but also to develop those angles and those blocking. So when he's blocking guys, it's one thing when you're blocking a guy square up on somebody, and it's, he can move him because he's big and strong enough. But when he gets them from the side or from he gets them from some angle and use that leverage, man, you'll see him just walk guys right out of the play. And Ohio State loves to do that. They love the versatility that it gives them with both him and Mitch Rossi, and so it's a really effective part of their running and passing game. But watch Stover in motion and count how many times he does that during a game because it's a lot.
Sounds good. So some big news. It's looking like Emeka Egbuka is not going to be going today as well. Any thoughts on that? That's, I think, a little bit of a surprise to all of us.
Yeah, I mean, it's that's surprising, but not shocking. You know, I think this is the type of game where you're going to see anybody who woke up with any type of tightness anywhere or any type of stiffness or any type of whatever isn't going to go. And that's why we talked about those props. You know, it's hard to guess on some of these props because you're not
Yeah.
sure who's going to play, who's going to get pulled out of a after 6 plays or how long they're going to go. And that's why I'd be really wary about any CJ Stroud props because it just seems like they're trying to be extra careful with guys. And I think this is the game where you see a lot of the twos, threes, fours, and fives, and not a lot of the big names. And so yeah, that so like I said, I'd say I'm shocked but not surprised by the fact that Emeka's not going right now.
Are there? I mean, again, this is a hypothetical, but are there concerns against someone like Michigan State if we're going in there without, arguably our number one and number two receiver? But they kind of seem like another team that we might be able to just roll over even without some of our top playmakers.
Well, first of all, a week's a long way away. You know what I'm saying? So,
Yeah.
a lot of things can change between now and then. Um, I am concerned about our first trip on the road. Now, again, it's Michigan State, so I'm not that concerned. But I'd fast forward to the game at Penn State. I think that's going to be a very interesting game. That's going to be the first time that I legitimately go into the game saying, you know, let's find out how good we are because this team has not played on the road, 5 straight um, home games, and a lot of young guys haven't faced any adversity. Haven't really been, I mean, trailing to Notre Dame a little bit, but nothing really, really scary. You get behind, you get those hostile crowds. Maybe you inject a little bit of weather, change in the travel plans, whatever it is. Those games can always get interesting. I'm not that worried about it at Michigan State, but at Penn State, um, it's going to be interesting because playing on the road is different than playing at home. Everything about it is different. And for a young team like Ohio State, that's going to be something and something I'm keeping a really careful eye on.
Yeah, that certainly will be interesting to see. It isn't unusual. We've had a few, on paper tough opponents, but they've all been at home. The one thing obviously I don't want injuries pop up for anyone, but one thing today I'm actually excited to see. My guess is Julian Fleming is going to see a big jump in his number of snaps, right, with Egbuka out.
Yeah, you would certainly expect that to happen, and so this is a great chance for some of those younger wide receivers that we've been waiting to kind of unleash, and they know this is their time, and they've got to come out and shine and really do some good things, and you know, I, that's the great thing about being at Ohio State is when one door closes, another door opens, and this is your chance to kind of do your thing, and especially with the wide receivers because the it's not a secret that Ryan Day and Brian Hartline have not been completely pleased with the rapid development of some of the young guys. That doesn't mean they're not going to be great players. That doesn't mean they can't be great players this season. But they just want them to accelerate a little bit more. They want them to kind of get from here to there just a little bit quicker. And a game like today, that they're going to go to some of these guys and say, "Hey, look, this now's your moment. Now you got to go." And some of those guys will respond to it, and maybe a Jaden Ballard will come out and
Yeah.
have a game with 150 yards receiving, and we're all talking about him by night's end. And I certainly hope that's the case, and we certainly have guys like that are capable of doing it.
Yeah, Jaden, he's certainly one that came to mind. Like to see some of the freshmen pop. I think what's coming in with this incoming recruiting class has to be a little bit scary for those guys. So, you know, again, true freshmen, hard to contribute, but those guys will probably be looking over their shoulder a little bit, knowing what's coming in with this next recruiting class.
Yeah, no question. I mean, the next recruiting class is loaded, but the last ones have been loaded. You know, it's been
Yeah.
5 star after 5 star after 5 star, and now like, hey guys, it's time to produce. But yeah, you've got some guys that are coming in next year that are absolutely game ready and are going to be looking to play from snap one. So the competition is only going to get more fierce from here.
So speaking of young guys, we have another question in the chat. Is this the Sonny Styles breakout game? I think there's a chance for it. He might get in pretty early.
Well, I'm sure glad we're talking about Sonny Styles because he's a guy that I cannot be more excited about Sonny Styles. I'm old school. I love the big safeties, and to me, the Roger Harper day. I've mentioned him a couple times for the older guys that remember Roger Harper, who was well ahead of his time as a big safety back in the day, and I love those guys that can, uh, you know, deliver the hits, the Cam Chancellors, the guys that can bring it from the defensive secondary, but can also are big enough to play the overhang and step into the box and not get bounced around too much. But Sonny is everything you want in a player. I mean, the thought that this guy should still be playing in high school right now is
Exactly.
terrifying because I mean he is a grown ass man and he can play it all. He can run with anybody. He can cover. He can hit. And the thought of him bringing it for the defensive secondary, it was just got to be terrifying to opposing receivers because he is big and imposing and not afraid to bring it.
I guess I mean the one question I have. I mean, do you think he could? I guess outgrow being a safety, given he's still pretty young. I mean, he's probably not finished growing. The guy, what is he, 6'4" already? All right. Do you think? I don't know. Is there a cap on kind of like the size for a safety position, or do you think he's just sort of the one of those unicorns that you can throw back there and he's going to just roam the field and make plays for us?
Well, I think he is a unicorn, but like, could he be a Micah Parsons like unicorn? And again, I'm not saying he's Micah Parsons, but we're talking about position and type of player and things like that. Yeah, I could see him being a pass rushing defensive end. I could see him being weak side linebacker. I could see him being a strong side defensive end. I could see him being staying at safety. But I mean, he's just one of the guys that in the year 2022, the players that make the plays on defense, the guys that really give you the most flexibility are those hybrids. It's almost like in basketball, those wings in basketball. Like this is what you're looking for. If you had a defense of 11 guys and you wanted them to be one size, it would be Sonny Sonny Styles' size, and you could survive. You couldn't survive with 12 Jack Sawyer or 11 Jack Sawyers or 11 tiny quarterbacks, but 11 guys that are 6'4", 220. Yeah, you at least have a chance out there on the field. And yeah, Sonny could play just about anywhere, and this certainly could be a breakout game for him. And I'm going to be watching for his number whenever he's out there for sure.
Perfect. So another question from the chat. It seems like someone was asking who are your top four teams for the college football season. I think it's pretty unanimous for the top three. I would say. I mean, at least for me, you have. I probably put Georgia 1, Ohio State 2, Alabama 3. That 4 spot's a little trickier. It looks like Michigan probably is going to pull away with this one, so I'd probably put them 4. But what about you? Who do you have for your top 4 so far this season?
So is it so far this season, or is it at the end of the season, or what are we? Is it top 4 as of today?
So I was answering as of today because I personally don't believe Michigan will be in the top 4 at the end of the season because as you said earlier, I'm expecting a loss to Ohio State.
Yeah, I just can't stand Michigan, so I can't even have them in my top 4. So I'm gonna stick USC in there just on principle, just because I think Michigan's a paper tiger, and so I can't even now as of today because I see through them so much that I'm going to elevate the Trojans up there with Georgia and Alabama and Ohio State and call that the top 4 and call that the college football playoff.
Yeah, they're. I could see USC being in the top 4, and right now, I think that's a fair argument. They had a tough game last week. It was a close game, but I trust Lincoln Riley to keep that offense going. So just checking in the scoreboard. So now we have Michigan 20-7 over Iowa. Ole Miss, Kentucky 22-19. Ole Miss with the lead. That's in the fourth quarter. TCU absolutely blowing out Oklahoma 48-17 still. We got a tie game in the fourth, 10-10. Purdue and Minnesota. Kansas State up 27-20, and then Utah with an early lead 14-7 over Oregon State. Coming off last week, I thought I really expected a little more from Minnesota. Purdue's had kind of a strange year. They had a few games, that Syracuse game, which they completely blew and threw away, and they were right there, I believe, with Penn State as well. So Purdue team might be a little bit better than their record shows, but I did expect Minnesota to pull away in that one.
Yeah, and they still might, but I think you're right. I mean, I think Purdue's better than people think, and I think Minnesota's better than people think. And I think you're always looking for those teams during the season that if you played them, like one of those weird like Thursday night games or whatever it is, and the crowd got all fired up and something happened, and could you lose to them? Those would be the types of teams that you could, they're good enough that they could beat you, and. So some of the Big Ten teams that they're just not good. It doesn't matter when you play them; it's not going to matter. But those are teams that they got some players and they have some elements that look pretty good. And like I said, for a very disappointing
Yeah.
Big Ten, those teams are not bad.
Who do you have coming out of the West? It's a little bit trickier.
I mean, I think it's got to be Minnesota.
Wisconsin's getting waxed by Illinois right now, 34-10.
Yeah, I just
Wow.
yeah, I know. It's like I said, it's one of those things where you're like, is it the hangover from playing Ohio State, or was it just Wisconsin? I mean, again, remember I had predicted Ohio State to beat Wisconsin last week, 42-7. So I didn't think much of Wisconsin either. But this one's a little bit surprising to me as well. It's like I said, it's just we're not going to know about Ohio State really until the very end of the year. So right now it's all these games are just kind of auditions and just kind of get through them, check the boxes, move on, stay healthy, and get the W and move on to the next game.
Yeah, this it's not really looking like the year that the West is going to knock off the East in the Big Ten championship. But yeah, 34-10. That's it is a little. It's not really disconcerting because that Ohio State game. I mean, we really could have beat them 70-7. I feel like if we had kept the starters in. So I mean that was just perfection in that first half, just marching down the field for touchdowns each time. So that was night and day against Wisconsin. But yeah, maybe they're not a very good team. And Iowa, if their defense isn't scoring 3 touchdowns, they're in big trouble, right? With pretty much every game. Actually, I think they had 2 defensive scores against Rutgers. So, yeah, they're dependent on their defense. West not looking so good. All right, so flipping back over a few questions. So, one thing we've talked about before, we're getting a lot of pressure from the interior linebackers, defensive tackles. Not as many defensive end sacks as we had hoped. So how many sacks are we seeing today? And, you don't have to give an exact number, but do you think that this is the day the defensive ends are getting home and getting some of those sacks and up on the board?
I'm going to say yes. I think that Ohio State, I think part of the next evolution of the Knowles scheme is kind of freeing up some of those defensive ends. And, by freeing up, what I mean is, the Knowles defense is all about support. It's about other players doing things that allow other guys to go make the plays, whether it be defensive linemen tying up guys the linebackers can throw to the ball, or linebackers doing things that can allow the safeties to step up and make a play. I think they're going to be making some subtle changes on the defensive line that's going to allow the defensive ends to get loose and get home. And I think we'll have our best defensive end sack day of the year today.
They've been really close. It's been strange. They just haven't been able to get there and totally get home. But yeah, I mean, it's been interesting because JT Sawyer and also Zach Harrison. It's been interesting how Ohio State sort of employs this communication around starters so that everyone can feel like a starter, which I find a little bit strange because personally, I think JT and Jack Sawyer are clearly the number 1 and 2 defensive ends on this team. But I'm expecting a big rotation again today. Do you think Zach Harrison made the right choice in coming back? I know he based on his physical ability and probably how he'll test, has been projected as a high draft pick again 2 years now, going on, and but it just doesn't seem like he's really progressed as much as we would have hoped. Do you think it made the right decision coming back? I personally would say
Well,
so, even if the numbers aren't there.
yeah, I don't think he really had much choice, because I'm not sure how much demand there was for him. Um,
Yeah,
and the thing about Zach though that's strange, and this is legit strange. I've never seen a guy that can test as well as he can. I mean, when you see the numbers this guy generates on just about every agility drill, 10-yard dash, 40-yard dash, three cone drill. I mean, it will just, you look at him and think he's just a can't miss, just absolutely can't miss because he can do it all. But for whatever reason, it hasn't translated as well to the field. Not that he's been, totally overwhelmed or doesn't make the occasional big play, but you would think with that kind of physical ability that he would be, absolutely Chase Young or, Nick Bosa or Joe Bosa like out there, and he's just not. And they're trying to figure out how to unleash that and try to make that a little bit more in line with those tremendous physical skills, but they haven't been able to do it yet. And but hey, there's 2/3 of the season left. He's got all the ability in the world to do so. And when he does get a chance to test for some NFL teams, somebody's going to fall in love with him because he checks every box from that standpoint.
yeah, it's interesting because he's gonna put up these crazy numbers, but sometimes if you take the game film and you just watch like slow motion from when the snap starts, it seems like he is often like one of the slower guys getting off the line. Like his he starts his motion a little bit after everyone else. It's almost like a little bit of a delayed reaction, despite having some real quick twitch ability, right, with speed and strength. So yeah, I don't know, but it's he's definitely done well against the run. I think he's been probably underrated given his ability to stop the run on that Ohio State defensive line.
Yeah, no, he's definitely like you said. When you see, I mean, they were not playing the bare front last week against Wisconsin. They were playing four defensive linemen, and those guys were tying up the six offensive linemen for Wisconsin, allowing those run blockers to run free. So that's definitely a heck of a job by somebody on there, and you know, Zach is certainly a part of that.
Someone had a funny comment in the chat. Yeah, I think this is the best start for college football in the state of Kansas in quite some time, right?
Yeah, yeah, no doubt about that. Now, a little mini update: Michigan, Iowa. It's 27, but Iowa's 4th and 2 from like the 6-yard line right now. It's threatening to score against Michigan.
All right.
So
I
that
think
would be it's a big play right now, 4th and 2. So hopefully, here we go. Iowa back. They're in the eye. Oh, he's running. Oh, he's throwing. Oh, short.
uh,
Penalty flag. Penalty flag. I think they bailed him out. Penalty flag. I think they called a flag on Michigan.
all right.
Yeah, just keep it alive, keep hope alive. So hopefully that's what it
I
was.
mean, they usually. I had some hope for that game just because they in that home stadium they seem to have some ups. I mean, they showed a graphic early on in the game of all the top five teams that came there, and they have a pretty good record against top 15. Unfortunately, one of the worst losses. You know what was up on the screen. So
Oh yeah.
yeah, they were giving. I think because the game was on Fox, giving Urban Meyer a little bit of a hard time, saying, "I wonder who's the coach for that one."
Oh, oh no, they called pass interference against Iowa on
Oh
that
no.
one. Yeah, so it's a no bueno. But
Well, coming into today, I mean, I think for the scoring offense, Michigan, there were a couple points in the Big Ten ahead of Ohio State, number one. Of course, that was after playing, Little Sisters of the Poor for the first few weeks. So, uh, Ohio State coming out of next week or coming out of this week should certainly jump to that number one scoring offense in the Big Ten. I think Michigan has showed that while they're formidable, Iowa's a good defense. They're not putting up 60 points the last few weeks against better opponents.
no, I'm just telling you, Michigan is not great offensively. It's just if you can play Hawaii and you can play some of the teams that they're playing, then you can put those big numbers up. They're just not. They don't have that. And Corum's okay. He's fine. Their quarterback positions, yeah, Their offensive line's fine, and their wide receivers are they're just typical Michigan wide receivers. So I'm not seeing anything out there that's scary.
Yeah, it seems like McCarthy. He's sort of like one of those quarterbacks that he's not going to take any chances, which is good. More of a game manager, but chasing like efficiency and perfection. Because today, what he's 18 for 22, but only 155 yards, right? I think 7 yards per catch. CJ Stroud has taken shots. He had that dime he threw last week, which honestly would scare most people, where he put it right between two defenders. It was like a bullet for a touchdown. And yeah, it seems like McCarthy right now he's not really taking many chances, which could probably get you past the Iowas of the world. But it'll be interesting to see what happens when they play Ohio State or even this Penn State game that's coming up.
Yeah, they're running a lot of those little drag routes to the tight end, and he's not throwing the ball down the field, and that's fine. You can do that against these teams, like you said, that you're you're physically more dominant than. But you get up against the big boys, and that stuff's not going to work. You're going to have to move the ball down the field, otherwise they're going to smother you. And I think they're going to really struggle with that.
So how about for a later game today? One of the questions in the chat: do you think that Arkansas can give Bama a scare or even pull the upset?
Um, I think this feels like the type of game that Alabama that you'd want it to be closer, but it feels like Alabama's just going to kind of overwhelm them and kind of pull away. But this is I will warn everybody, this has been a crazy year already in college football, and so I mean look at even last night UCLA Washington. Not many people had that happening, and I think it's just been kind of a continuation of these crazy games, and there's anything can happen. I take nothing for granted, and I think if you want to bet on anything, you bet on chaos because there aren't any great teams, no juggernauts in college football this year. So anybody could beat anybody on a given week.
Yeah, it's selfishly as a fan, I'm trying to get past that point where I get frustrated when we're blowing out, or we're not blowing out someone, but we're winning. It's like 21-10, let's say, against like Notre Dame. Like I need to learn how to be happy about that, but we're so spoiled as Ohio State fans and expect this perfection. It's not attainable, right? And we should just be grateful that we're not running into some of those weeks that painfully we've had in the past. The Purdue game, the Iowa game. That's always a possibility. So, but yeah, this has been a absolutely crazy year in college football.
Yeah, no, and I don't think that's an accident. I just think it's between COVID and the portal and the different things going on. I think, like I said, you're left with a bunch of really good teams and then a bunch of really bad teams, and you've got coaches in flux, you've got programs in flux, and I just think it's going to be. It just as the feeling you can just kind of tell it's going to be a wacky year all the way to the end, and all we're hoping for from Ohio State standpoint is we just avoid the wackiness and let everybody get caught up in the and all the froth of that stuff, and we just keep our sheet clean.
Yeah, so I mean, I wouldn't say you're down on Michigan, but you're not quite a believer. Who would you? I guess who would you rate that Penn State Michigan game? Who do you have as the better team, Penn State or Michigan? Gun to your
Well,
head.
I think they're both. I mean, I think it depends on where the game's played, obviously. But I mean, I think they're both flawed teams. I think Michigan at home is formidable. I think Penn State at home, especially in a whiteout, is always formidable. I think both those teams on the road are going to be pretty pedestrian. So, for this year, I think Ohio State getting Michigan at home, huge for us. I think playing at Penn State, at least it's going to be an early game, and that's a good thing. But Michigan's so beatable. I mean, Michigan is absolutely so beatable, but it's just funny to watch. People want Michigan to be good. They just want the media wants them to be good. The country wants them to be good. They want it to be back to what it was like Woody and Bo, and it's just they're not that great. So but we'll see. I mean, it's all talk until we beat them again. But that's why I can't wait for the end of November.
Yeah, I'm up in Chicago today, and a lot of Michigan shirts around here, and yeah, they a lot more than you probably saw a few years ago. So they certainly want them to be good, but it's Michigan. They're look. I got to give them credit. They're pretty good at the hype machine early on in the season. We've seen that a few years, and last year, look, it materialized. They were a really good team going into the end of the year. But yeah, as you said, I mean, I think the game location matters a lot. I'm very happy that this Penn State game is not going to be a night game. I trust CJ Stroud, but I don't know. I just have like a little bit of worry of a CJ Stroud thrown into that kind of environment. He's, in my opinion, a better pure passer than maybe anyone we've ever had. But he doesn't have that. Justin Fields just kind of had that like tenacity that if it's Justin Fields going into the whiteout at Penn State while he's at Ohio State, I think I'd feel a little bit more confident. But a day game, I like my chances with CJ. He's been pretty incredible this year.
Yeah, well, Penn State has traditionally given us fits all times of the day, and like I said, for us, it's just really one of those things where we just gotta buckle it down. But watching those early road games, even that first road game at Michigan State, that's a good test for us. It's a good thing for us to see can we come out, go on the road, face some adversity, and be as dominant as we've been. And that's certainly going to be something I'm keeping an eye on.
Yeah. So one other question in the chat, and this was actually. I think a point of discussion earlier this week in Buckeye Scoop commentary was that Joe Royer really was turning some heads through preseason, but we haven't seen him. Obviously, he's been injured. Do you think he's going to have any kind of impact this year? And if not, is he going to be someone who really steps up potentially next year if Kate Stover is off to the NFL?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Joe has just been dealing with some unspeakable tragedy, the death of his mom, and obviously before that on something that doesn't even rate on the same scale, but dealing with mono and some other things. So he's been through the ringer this year, and so much so that you hate even to talk about football in the context of him, given what he's had to face. But just from a pure football standpoint, he's a tremendous player. One of the most talented football players at that position that we've ever had. So I have high hopes for him long term. This year has just been kind of a lost season for him, and I just pray for him that he can find peace and find his way back out there. But he's going to be a heck of a player before he's done. He's going to be one of those guys, much like Kate Stover was, that kind of come out of nowhere when you're like, wow, I knew he was good, but I didn't realize how good. And another guy, I'll just throw another name out there on somebody that I'm just real high on that we just don't talk about a lot as we're wrapping this up is Reed Carrico. Reed is a guy that nobody talks about him. It's like it's kind of a forgotten man on the roster. I'm telling you, he might be the most physically gifted player on the team, and I'm talking about just overall athleticism, speed, power. He is super gifted. So when he gets the thing and when he comes out, I know people are going to be like, wow, where did that guy come from? Remember, we were talking about him because he is a load and he is a football player too, through and through, but he can do it all. And when they go to testing with him, he just tests off the charts. So watch for big things out of him in the future. And he's one of my sleepers as we kind of move forward.
All right. Well, I think that's a wrap. We're about 30 minutes from kickoff. It's been fun. Really excited for the game. And Buckeye fans, get your drinks ready. If you're at the game, have a good time. This was we're going to keep doing these live streams. We might even have a few other wrinkles in the future, but really appreciate your support. Make sure you join the BuckeyeScoop.com community. We'll continue to put new podcasts and content out there. Thank you very much for joining, and go